Welcome, welcome. We're live here. I love this new software that we're using for our Tech Plus podcast series. It's going to be a really exciting session today. We're talking about how great leaders win with AI. I have two special guests with us today. I have our own director of AI, Ezderman. Welcome, Mo. And I have a partner of ours from Worldwide Technology. I have the Global VP of Retail, Adam Dumey. So Adam, thank you for being here. I'm excited to kick this off and talk about how leaders can win with AI. Just a few notes to start, though. We do have Mindgrub's marketing team in the background now, and they are going to be fielding all the questions that you have as audience members. And for the right questions that really pertain to what we're talking about, marketing now has a capacity to give us a countdown and put a question in front of us. And there's an animation that I've yet to see. So I'm really excited to see that. And we'll see it at the same time with you as the audience. Please ask those questions. We're going to talk for 45 minutes. We have a hard stop at 1 today, and we're going to keep it very dynamic with the questions in line. And I, as the moderator, Todd Marks, CEO of Mindgrub, we make and market software for clients. We are now making agents and bots, and we have a new AI works team. I'm going to serve as a moderator, and I've got a bunch of questions of my own. So why don't we kick things off? We'll go in first name alphabetical order here. Adam, why don't you tell us about WWT and yourself and your role and what you do in the organization and how you're using AI?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Adam Dumey, Global VP at Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology is a $23 billion technology and professional services firm. We have operations across the globe, and our core competency is helping use technology to enable business outcomes on behalf of our customers. And so from a personal perspective, I do a fair amount of speaking. So artificial intelligence in terms of content creation and review, and just being an editor for me is a staple of my day. And worldwide perspective, obviously we deliver artificial intelligence to our customers, but we also use a large amount of AI internally, for not only to drive revenue, but also to achieve our own operational efficiency goals, just like our customers are looking for.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Adam. When we talked pre-show, Adam was saying that AI is going to be embedded in our bodies. So we're going to build up to this. We're going to talk slow and where do you start with AI, and then we'll talk about the future toward the end of the series. But without further ado, our director of AI, Mo, please introduce yourself. How are you using AI?
Great. Thank you for having me, Todd, here today. Mo Ezderman, leading the initiative at Mindgrub with AI. And what we do, basically, we're working with customers to transition them from being curious about AI to finding opportunities that make sense for them in the organization. So a lot of the work that we do, kind of rethinking processes, internal processes in our organization that humans used to do, and rethinking it how we can implement AI technology to enable human to do maybe other things, but also putting the human in the loop in these processes. So a lot of internal processes, agentic systems, but also rethinking new product and enabling existing product with new AI capabilities.
Right. I like it. So I'm very curious, though, to hear from our audience before we jump in and really share with them where businesses can start with AI. I want to get an understanding of where is our audience today in their journey to use AI. So marketing team, throw that poll up there. If you could answer this question, where you are in your journey, that's going to really help us make sure that we can talk about what those next steps might be for you. All right, we're getting good responses. Oop. All right, 1098-765-432. All right, freeze the poll. It looks like we have 27% of our audience, roughly a third just starting out. We have a third who are piloting and in a bit of a research and R&D phase. And we have a third that are building on that. And then the last, if they were quarters, would be scaling it organizational wide. Meaning at the enterprise level. And I think a lot of organizations are just starting to scratch the surface. And then we do have, it looks like a handful of folks that have no clue to where to begin. So let's start there. Let's start with just the beginning. Mo, Adam, like, where do companies start? What do they do day one? I'm not even sure. Like, I know I hear about AI. Where do I start?
Sure, I can chime in. I think like when I'm thinking about AI, there's like kind of two bi-directional effort that needs to happen. It needs to be kind of a top down, but also from the bottom up. From the top down, like obviously, like it has to be like feel like support from leaders that this is a really, really important initiative in the companies. They need to provide the tools, they need to provide the fund and the time for people to implement AI in the organization. And from the bottom up, I think most of the idea that we see, it's actually come from the bottom up, from people that doing the work. They have most likely the best idea of like what kind of AI we should implement. So once we have this kind of bi-directional information, I think the next step is really start like mapping processes, internal processes in the organization, how humans do their jobs, and also where the data is. I think that's like something that people really forget, because a lot of the data is sitting in our heads and when people are doing processes. So like you have to kind of document the process, but also understand where the data right now and what data you're missing to enable new capabilities.
Yeah, so two things, and then Adam, I want to hear from you. First, I like that, where's the data? But the first point that you said, both top down and bottom up, just to add color to that, I remember how excited I got about AI as Mindgrub, and I got in an all hands meeting. I'm like, we're going to use AI over here. We're going to use it over here, and it's going to be over there. And I was so excited. I'm like, everyone's going to be totally on board. They're going to love AI. We're going to be jamming as a company. It's our next rocket ship. And the big takeaway was, oh my God, the CEO is eliminating our jobs. And I'm like, where did that come from? I didn't say anything like that whatsoever. And then we hired Mo, and Mo actually created an ambassador program for Mindgrub, and it was finding the peers in each of the departments that were also, an aficionado in learning AI. And then they would teach their peers in kind of a train the trainer sort of fashion. And I got kind of relegated to like, putting business plans together and pro formas and coming up with budget. And like, I'm like, oh man, I wanted to be like, a hardcore user of AI, which I am personally, but, not evangelical within the organization. It really is a peer thing. So Adam, that's what we found out. I knew you were a couple billion, but you said like 20, 32 billion or something like that.
Yeah,
I had no idea you guys were that large. So AI must have started all over the place, like in the organization, right? How do you wrangle that together?
Yeah, and I think both of you hit on the great points. Working from your point, Todd, it is true. If the research suggests this and supports it, folks that aren't as engaged in AI tend to be more afraid of it. And folks like that are the result of your ambassador program all of a sudden realize the constraints and parameters of which AI can help. And so great move on your side. But for those in the audience, that is something that we see often. And so as we think about Mo, your point about bottoms up and top down, from our perspective, the top down is so critical for every point you mentioned, but it adds another level, which is accountability. So if it's driven at the CEO or board level, now all of a sudden there's influence in resource allocation or reprioritization, or there's an established governance and reporting mechanism that makes it all the way to the top. So there's a lot of incentive for those executives to follow through. And with organizations that we work with, typically, 85 of the Fortune 100 into middle market, we have a lot of opportunity to engage at that level. And the pace of AI adoption, we think, very closely correlates with the level of executive engagement. So the first place to start with AI is just getting these executives in a room and understanding collectively, where are we going with AI? What are those use cases that we want to explore? How do we want to govern? How do we want to monitor and evaluate? So just really kind of gathering executive alignment is the first step. It's not a technology problem. It's more of an organizational coordination challenge.
Right. Well, actually, that's a great conversation, and to talk about what do they rally around, because we have noticed that a lot of the early buyers in our case are CFOs looking at cost savings, and not to replace the humans, because humans need to do this amazing thing, and that's bring the humanity and the strategic thinking. Those are the things that humans, if humans are just showing up with facts, we know information is going to get commoditized with AI. They're bringing the humanity of it, the empathy, the emotional feeling of the thing, right? So,
Yep.
but as executives, like where in the organization have you found some great spots to, to rally around? Cost savings is one of them, right?
Yeah.
Revenue maximization is another.
Yeah, I think the umbrella is just how to differentiate in the market, right? So whether that's operating as a leaner organization, whether that's operating with a product that's unique and differentiated or a service, it's just to be different, right? And so the benefit of having all these executives in a room sponsored from top down is that there's clear direction that we have to think not just from a finance perspective or a product perspective, we're thinking about an organizational perspective. And if you're publicly traded, what drives benefit to the shareholders and your employees? And if you're privately held, again, how do we drive benefit to our customers and our employees?
You mean as a marketer, I can't just change the domain name to .ai and add a lot of value
It's
that way?
worked for many companies to date, but I would not view that as a scalable strategy. And it's funny, I've been around the game for 11 years or so, and a lot of these same challenges I saw in 2015 and 2020, and now it's this idea that there are very well-intentioned entities within an organization that may be forward-thinking or more risk-tolerant that want to dive into AI a bit faster. The challenge is when they do that and they make decisions for their particular set of use cases, there's a cascading effect to other parts of the organization. So if you put this use case on AWS, for example, all of a sudden now it creates complexity for those that want to leverage capabilities in Azure or GCP as just one example, but it's a trickle down. So really that coordination beyond .ai is definitely part of the mix.
I think you guys are touching like a really good point, which I think the audience say like they're looking for use cases right now. So I think this is like a really, really hard challenge because we're not short of things we can do.
That's right.
Finding the right opportunity that it's a cost effective and like actually makes sense. That's the hard part, which I think a lot of companies struggling.
Yeah, I actually, I was talking on another podcast the other day, and I said the key thing right now is to create a backlog of potential AI use cases within your organization, right? And as soon as you have that backlog, then you have to look at, well, how much does it cost for each of those use cases to produce the AI? And we're going to talk a little more about agentic AI here later on. But to produce the AI or to license the AI, to leverage the AI, to train your team to use the AI, what's the sunk cost there, right? Which is, either OpEx or CapEx cost. And then how much efficiency or how much revenue, right? How much does it save you? How much does it make you? So you can compute the ROI on each of those implementations, because we have heard of organizations that realize AI is the future. They're, moving full steam ahead, but then they're realizing that their licensing costs, their energy consumption costs for the AI is not, outweighing, the savings that they might have. So I think that backlog. So I love Adam talking about alignment, right? Once they have alignment, though, it might look like a number of opportunities, organizationally. And then I think you do need to assign value to each one and then put, potentially a little business case around it.
Yeah, and that's exactly our methodology is once you gain organizational alignment, what comes of that is exactly you said, it's a bunch of use cases, right? And then there's a methodology that anyone can employ, which is, okay, well, what's the matrix or what's the framework that we evaluate use case one versus use case two? And we typically go from a value and complexity quadrant. And so now you have kind of think of a dot chart, right, across which of these quadrants these use cases fall. And then to your point earlier, you can prioritize. And from the prioritization, then it's saying, okay, for use case one or two, here's the ROI, here's the risk profile, here's the ongoing cost, and then it's really a decision for the executive team to implement. So really laying that out in a structured way kind of cuts that time to value a lot shorter than kind of muddling around and struggling a bit.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, when you're talking about the enterprise and they're trying to move their business forward and, always do what they can for, their team, the community, and of course their stakeholders, right? It's really putting a business plan together. But what about the fact that we have AI popping up everywhere, right? In hospitals, if they didn't block it on the firewall, people could be taking, personal identifiable information and mistakenly posting it to ChatGPT 3, which, doesn't profess to store privacy as they do with 4. Like, and you said it a couple times earlier, that key word governance? Where do we start there to
Mhm.
make sure that we can keep, information secure and, we have ethical implementations of AI?
Mhm. Yeah, I can start. So it's interesting. If you think of on the enterprise space, there are organizations that have a different starting point just to kind of set a foundation. You have those organizations in highly regulated industries like financial services or pharmaceutical, where governance is part of their DNA, right? They have all this external pressure, they have legislation. So this is what they do. If you think of other industries, retail being one of them, that's not a muscle they've developed. And so they're still trying to answer that exact question that you just asked. And so, from a high level, we tend to think of governance across two buckets. One is just transparency in decision making. So AI is going to spit something out, but it's now a collection of experiences and thoughts, right? If we think of the agentic AI topic, it's a series of LLMs essentially. Now, whether that's chain of thought, whether that's mixture of experts, there's a cycle that goes through between iterations and spit something out. Well, from a governance perspective, do you have a sense of what that looks like? And do you have the tools to identify how the path was taken to achieve the outcome? And then those models are based on data. So do you have the lineage and the provenance to understand that the data fuel the model, fuel the outcome? And a lot of organizations are struggling with that one. And the second consideration from governance goes to the topic we started with, which is risk management. And I started my career as a program manager. And back then, PMI just drilled into my head this idea of a risk register, right? At a super high level, it's, hey, there's a column that has your use cases, just like you said, Todd, a column that has the supply chain of technology embedded in the use case, a column that has the stated ROI, the current costs, the ongoing costs, et cetera. But it gives you that snapshot of what your organization is doing with AI, only at the executive level, but at the board level. And so having that ability and there are plenty of players in the game, and it's becoming more of an emerging field, and the sophistication is growing every day. But having those components chunked together puts you in a really good position to have an understanding of what you're doing and doing it safely and responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. Governance is key. I mean, at Mindgrub, we're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant,
Exactly.
and we can bake in additional, governance around our use of AI into those plans. And you mentioned whether you're in healthcare and it's HIPAA compliance, whether you're in
Exactly.
finance and it's FINRA compliance, or, pharmaceuticals and you've got the FDA, right? Like they all have governance documents. Well, even if you're in retail and they don't, generally have governance documents, we can get them there. But then you need to train everybody. And Mo, tell us a little bit about the training program that you're doing. I know it's in Talent LMS. We have an online training program. How are you rolling that out to the business as it relates to, either AI expertise or governance issues?
Yeah, like first of all, like for the governance issues, like I think like the type of risk that we're dealing here, it's the same. Like it's been like right, like exposing information of user and things like that. I think the risk become like intensify because we can do so much more right now, right? I can upload Excel sheet to the LLM. I can upload a contract. That's something that in the past we couldn't do. So the risk is more. There's a lot more room for errors. So I think like what we're doing at Mindgrub, I think like training employees on like first of all like how those LLM works, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not a black box that there's a lot of things that going on into those LLM. So we, as Todd said, like we launched this ambassador program that we're starting by training of 6 weeks of a group of people in the organization that they are going to be like ambassador in the company, and they're going to train their department. So one fold is like train them on security, but also like use cases and really finding use case in their department that we can actually spin off different kind of projects. So right now we're at the point that we finished the 6 weeks of training, and we found like multiple use cases in the organization that we start implementing that they're really interesting use cases. When we started it, I was thinking like every person going to come with different ideas, but we end up basically it's one project that everybody chipping in that I think going to have like a big impact on our company. So
And the secondary impact of that, which is also now people feel they're part of the process,
exactly.
right? And so now it builds that ownership and that excitement that you mentioned earlier, Todd, where your starting point was. So that's really cool.
Yeah, well, and I actually the other day, one of the ambassadors that came out of the program, we were on a project together, and it was a pretty simple web application, but he's demoed the web application. I'm just sitting there, and then he goes, "And you know, Todd, how I developed this?" I'm like, "No, I don't." He's like, "I used Cursor AI and cranked it out. It was generally all AI that was driven." He said over 60%
Hmm.
of time savings.
Hmm.
So like that gave
Hmm.
me a big warm fuzzy. I'm like, all right, fixed cost everything. Like, got to get out of time and materials, remove human capacity as part of the equation, right? So I'm already thinking ahead. But I was super tickled to see that they were actually producing stuff with AI now, because I've
Hmm.
been having to sell the billable hour for years,
Hmm.
and we're
Hmm.
so tired of doing that.
Yeah, the whole model's changing. It
Oh,
really is. I mean, I think about some of the engagements that WWT executed 3 years ago, let's say, to do that today, 70% less time. It's just the tooling is so much more advanced. The acceptance of the market to use the tooling is so much more mature. So yeah, the game from a service provider is absolutely changing, and the expectations of your customers are also going to change.
100%. That's the scary part too, because things like websites had already gotten commoditized. I mean, we
That's right.
already have WordPress.com,
Hmm. Hmm.
Shopify's, right? Drag and drop, Bubbles, Wix, you name it, tools to produce websites that generally anybody can make.
Hmm.
Well, now that's moving into light application
That's right.
development.
That's right.
Eventually it's going to be all digital products,
That's right.
right? So
Hmm.
yeah, let's actually, so before we start getting super futuristic here, because I know I want to jump into that part of the conversation really bad, let's throw up a second poll here quickly. I want to just know what everyone's biggest adoption of AI is. So please take a minute and answer this poll, and then we can have those conversations as we talk about agentic AI.
Interesting.
All
Yeah.
right, interesting. So budget. So surprisingly, budget, I actually do
Right.
hear a lot.
Yeah,
That's what
Me
I hear.
too.
Number one is like, as soon as and maybe that's that bottom up piece, because people are already just starting to use the open source tools, the free tools. Like, everybody I know is out there just buying personal copies of ChatGPT because it's, running their life. They're able to create, GPTs to do all their Christmas shopping and stuff these days.
Hmm.
But so we have skills, trust, and time as the main barriers. Okay, that's very interesting. All right, so in the workplace, how do we, continuing the theme of training them, creating an ambassador program, right? And we're going to move in the direction of agentic AI here, but how do we pair humans and AI to work together best, right? We mentioned, Cursor AI, Microsoft Copilot, right? And, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, LinkedIn Copilot, Git repo Copilot, right? There's a lot of this concept of cobotics,
Mhm.
right? How do we get humans working well with AI?
Yeah, I can chime in. I think I get asked that question a lot, and I always say, like, if you spend 30 days every day, 1 hour on one of those LLM, kind of playing with it, see like what you can do with it. And after the 30 days, every task that you have, you're gonna ask yourself, how can I do it with AI? In time, in like 4 months, you're gonna be expert in AI, you're gonna be able to adapt. So
So
what
that's
I'm
like,
trying
how
to
can I
say,
get my six pack back?
right, that's the program of six
You
pack.
gotta, like, you gotta go on a
Now
routine.
right, like, and that's my recommendation, is like, you can't sit on the sideline and wait for someone to teach you that. You're gonna have to get into those tools and try different things, and every day to figure out what I can do today with AI that optimize my days.
Hmm.
That's a great answer, because people were saying that getting skills and then having the time, right? That's the same thing as, I really want my six pack back. Well, I'm the one who has to do it every day. I got to go, run some laps, do some crunches, right? So every day you got to try a new tool.
Hmm.
And you'll see that, by the way, if you, go through Instagram or TikTok, you'll see a lot of the 30-day challenge where they list a number of apps. I mean, there's some good ones. I was tickled by my accounting department the other day. I've been an advocate for not taxing the tech community more in the state of Maryland, and I've been looking at other states that might behoove us to move to. I have, been very public about this. And our accountant did some research on all the various, taxes, whether we're talking about, corporate taxes, personal income taxes, capital gains. And he sent me a Notebook LM podcast to tell me about taxes. And it was fascinating. I loved it. Like, it was 9-minute podcast. And now I know exactly what states I should, visit for vacations and, consider down the road. Right. There's just so many tools out there.
Mm-hmm.
So individually, they need to start in on them. From an organization wise, we need to figure out what are those tools. And I have heard budget. Adam, you kind of laughed at that too, because I was talking to schools the other day, and we build bots for schools all the time, which saves them over human capital costs.
Believe it.
Right. And so, like, instead of hiring more guidance counselors, you can create a bot, and it's less expensive than more guidance counselors, right? In the case you have to expand. But as far as rolling out AI across an organization, schools, if they wanted to get every teacher a license for ChatGPT 4, that's a cost they don't have, right? So how do you, like, Adam, when you encounter the enterprise, right, working with large organizations that then might make the determination they can get an ROI out of ChatGPT, now all of a sudden you say, well, here's how much it's going to cost per person per month, and they look at that number. Are they getting sticker shock? Like, are they like, well, we already did the math now. We know the business plan. We're going to get ROI, so let's bite the bullet and do it.
Yeah, enterprises are moving very cautiously. So I haven't seen, for example, you mentioned Cursor. So we have some very close partnerships with some Cursor-like companies like Codium, right? The same kind of code kind of generation tool. And so we have organizations that are leveraging some of those tools in a very methodical fashion to prove out the ROI. And the great thing about some of these tools, like a code assistant or a knowledge retrieval tool, they prove out pretty quickly. It's starting to become a very much established science that those two tools at scale will generate positive ROI. The reason I was so surprised at that poll is because money, I tell my kids all the time, right? Money doesn't grow on trees, or at least my trees. And so the idea is to have budget for AI, you have to take it from somewhere else. Right. And so there's this reprioritization effort that takes place, including your example with universities. And that's a hard process to complete, from a social currency perspective, from a technical analysis. And so what we see right now is organizations are really testing the waters. And we think that is going to be a very short window. And then there's going to be wide scale adoption and procuring of licenses for tools such as the Codiums and the Cursors, and Glean, and a great knowledge retrieval tool as well.
And it's funny you mentioned Codium too. We also work with Codium. They had a tool called Windsurf.
That's right.
Which outputs websites. And funny story, I think if I have my history right, the makers of Codium somehow were involved in the OpenAI effort, created Codium, and then created Windsurf, or maybe they hired OpenAI people to do Windsurf.
Yeah.
Well, then apparently Windsurf sold back to OpenAI recently for $2 billion.
That's right.
And it's a tool that generates websites. We've been morphing that to now generate we're a WordPress VIP partner, and we have to make light WordPress sites for publishers all day long. And it's got to be better than like a Wix or a WordPress.com. It has to use their custom templates with their custom integrations. And so we were able to morph basically similar to Codium, a multi-agent system that we've now enhanced to generate WordPress websites. And in this case, it would have taken us, call it 20, 30K for a light custom WordPress website with a lot of human capital. Now it's a prompt to product, and we have a meeting with the client. We do a prompt, we output the site. The next day they look at it and they're like, oh, can you change these things? Update the prompt, output the site again. We're talking hours and days, not weeks and months. And so you're absolutely right. When you can show the cost savings and the efficiency of getting out the door, it really is a no-brainer. I did in there mention multi-agent. So Mo is now working with the AI Works team to enhance this multi-agent system. Mo, can you describe what that is? Because we've been talking about humans using AI to now replicating steps humans used to do. And in the case of the AI Works team, we used to do wireframing, visual design, engineer it, QA it. Now our product owners can basically work with the client, put a prompt together, and we go straight to QA at the end of the day, right? So, what are those in between? There used to be IAs and design that now they're all turning into strategists because we're creating these things called agents. What is an agent, Mo?
Right. So I'm going to try to define what agent is, because I think there's a lot of misconception what agent is. I think everything that moving and do something smart, people call it agent. So agent has like three attributes. One, agent has to have a memory. He needs to remember conversations that we're talking. The other thing, it needs to have an LLM, basically one of those large language models, like in the middle as a reasoning agent. So far, I'm kind of like, it sounds like ChatGPT. But the third thing is you need to have access to tools, and specifically internal tools. So if I'm having conversation with the agent, now I can access my HR systems, and I can ask my CRM system and get information that proprietary to my organization and get it into the LLM for the reasoning. So that's what agent is. And there's like two types of agent. One is kind of like optimized workflow. We talked about that. The other thing that's really interesting is multi-agent. Todd, you mentioned multi-agent. And what multi-agent is, it's basically mimicking like a physical team. So imagine that if you develop a software, you have a product manager, a project manager, you have an engineers. Now you're creating those agents, small agents that can talk to each other. So if you can think about what's the process of software development, you need to create a requirement, product managers doing it. So now you have a virtual agent that do those things, that kind of talking to all the agents, and then the human is in the loop, just receive the output of that and do the judgment and kind of make some of the decisions. And this is going to be the future. This is like what everybody's right now building, and this is where we're heading as a society.
Yeah, no, I love it. To bring it back to my earlier metaphor, if you think about, a multi-agent system, right? And to make websites, we would have had an information architect who does the wireframing, a visual designer to do the creative, an engineer to do, maybe a front-end engineer, a back engineer, and then we'd have a project manager that would manage that team. Mm-hmm. Well, now each one of those roles would be an agent. Then that project manager, we're calling them an orchestral agent. And I actually think of it from like my wind ensemble days. I don't know why we didn't just call them the conductor, but you think about a conductor in front of the band.
Orchestrator,
Orchestrator, right. An orchestra, the way that, a wind ensemble, or a quintet or stuff would work together, right? You have the conductor, and that's what that orchestrator. So as it's interfacing with the user, it's figuring out, what types of information needs to be handled. So if it's like, Saturday Night Live and they're saying, give me more cowbell, right? Now, all of a sudden we have that orchestrator, cueing the cowbell agent to give us more cowbell, so to speak, right? Or the designer to give me designs, or the information architect to give me wireframes, right? So this multi-agent approach is agents doing individual kind of roles, displacing humans, right? And this is what I tell humans, because humans are like, so skills, we talked about getting the skills, that's at 30 minutes a day. We talked about the time to do it. And it's like, a six pack, you just got to do a little bit every day. It's that trust factor of trusting the AI. Well, think of it this way for the humans. There's a lot of grunt work that we just don't want to do, right? Copying here, pasting there over and over again, right? Wireframes, you want to do the creative, strategic thinking of the wireframe, but they have to draw the boxes and put the pixels on the screen. That is the grunt work, right? Like, let's be real. Let's say that our job security as an information architect myself is not they have to draw every box. It's to think through where the boxes should go, what that UI should be. So eventually we'll want to just put our thinking caps on and think through, and then that's going to end up like creating all the boxes on the page. But in the meantime, we got to use voice and prompts before we can just put our thinking cap on. All right, so I do really want to see this feature, and we have a couple questions. So, Brandy, why don't you throw a question at us? All right, here it is. What are some ways AI could be implemented to help improve efficiencies for a startup? Oh, I love this question because, as you know, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I'm always trying to create new businesses. I have, a started a robotics business. I've got a location-based services business. We have government contracting. We have an incubator business. I actually have a restaurant with my wife too, right? Well, they have said that the next billion-dollar business of Mention will be the one-man band who has $1 billion in revenue. So as a startup, I'm always thinking about how I can create that next business without human capital. As an existing business, I think, how can I make my humans more efficient to get more throughput and to generate more revenue, or to create efficiencies, or to do better by the community, right? So internally, I'm always looking to create efficiencies with AI. But as a startup, I'm going to look at how can I create product or revenue without that much human capital. Mo, Adam, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think startup is probably the ideal case to do all of that, because it's a low risk, right? Like you can actually be an engineer using a lot of this tool. You can be like marketing person using marketing copies, creating videos with really low risk. So there's no short on opportunity with startups with low risk. And as Todd said, like I have somewhere a list of companies, of 3 people company that they become like few billion companies just this year. And it's going to happen. So I think the challenge is not with the startup way to do AI. I think the challenge is big companies, how to adopt AI, because they have the high risk and they have all these processes, and it's really, really hard to implement AI in this kind of environment.
Yeah, and if I connect the dots with some of the previous conversation, sticking with the Codium company, I had the pleasure of presenting at South by Southwest with that organization, and they share a very interesting story about how their entire organization has been challenged to use AI in their operations. So what that means is a seller, let's say, that historically, right, sellers historically, maybe they're not the most proactive, right? They're not drawing boxes on slides. So sellers at Codium are leveraging Codium to generate demos specific for a customer, right? They're marketing. Every entity within that organization is leveraging artificial intelligence. And so as I think about a startup, of which that is, and other startups of much smaller scale that aren't purchased by OpenAI, I would think of it as your startup cost go pretty much as close to zero as possible. So from an infrastructure perspective, and from even an HR perspective, and Todd, you started earlier about one of your employees was looking at, as you think about where to relocate, if to relocate, pulling in some of that data and making a business case. That's something AI could absolutely do as you think about creating a startup, as you think about operationalizing HR systems that can be impacted, and moving beyond rule-based triggers for a lot of your operations. I would say you're not short of ideas for a startup. It's just about picking the right tool that maximizes the return, given your time and money are so precious at that point.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to give you just a minute to think through this, and we're going to answer one more question, and then we're going to finish with what does AI look like in 5 years and 10 years from now. So start thinking about that. And Team Mindgrub, why don't you give us one more question in the meantime, and then we'll leave a minute for each of us to kind of give that 5 and 10 year vision of where AI is going. All right, so the next question, as AI systems become more agentic, how do we ensure they remain aligned with human intent, values, and accountability? That's a great question. Mindgrub, we actually created the Maslow's principles at one point, is like robotics, like don't hurt humans, essentially. But Mo, Adam, anything to add in how we bake in, making sure that AI is ethical and aligned with our values?
Yeah, I would just add, again, connecting dots with another topic. It's really the statement at all levels, within our schooling, within our government, within our organizations, that AI is meant to augment human judgment, not automate it. And so as you think about agentic systems, someone has to oversee them, and someone has to make sure that they're spitting out the right outcome, and someone has to ensure that they're driving the right business outcomes, right? And that's all a function of this question, is really ensuring, and to your point earlier, Todd, about maybe elevating the application of what it means to be human, and elevating the application of judgment versus grunt work. I think this is part of the natural evolution of any technology, but having humans in the loop, having humans across the process flow is going to address any concern as we think about aligning values or showing accountability.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, actually, we call it human in the loop, right? At the end of the day, you don't want AI to just be able to do a process and go unchecked. You need that human to regulate the humanity and the ethics and the values of it all.
Yeah, just to add, like we talked about human in the loop, which is absolutely very important. One thing that also super important is like to understand how we train those models. And for that, we need government policy, because right now we don't really know the data that we train those models. They probably unbiased. Like we need to make sure that they actually provide the information that align with our value and the culture. And that's hopefully going to come soon.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah, there was one other question that came in that said, can you provide guidance regarding implementing usage policies within an organization? And Mo, I think you touched on a great point. Like, we need policy coming from our government officials. We didn't have seatbelts until they said seatbelts save lives and made sure that we had seatbelts so we got tickets, right? So we definitely need our government structures to create policy. That's what government does well. But then internally, you're basically creating same sort of policy, the same way that companies have their handbook that spells out a ton of policy. Can we bring our dogs to work or not, right? You have to expand that handbook. That might be a whole section on how to properly use AI within the organization. And then that goes all the way into IT to make sure that, certain software is allowed in the firewall or not, to get through, into your internal structure. What gets loaded onto the laptops, what licenses people have, that all needs to be regulated. For somebody that, doesn't love regulation, I think AI is one place that we absolutely need to regulate. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. Mo and Adam, we're going back to our challenge question, 5 and 10 years from now. All right, does anyone want to start?
I'm going to I don't know if it's 5 or 10 years, but I know we have short on time, so I'm going to be a little quickly. I think we're moving away from the UI and screens. We're going to speak to technology. We're going to have something in the glasses or something that we interact on a daily basis, and we're going to be really connected to the 3D world. Right now, we're all kind of facing screens. Now we're going to look at to the world and start interacting with the world.
Oh, so your big prediction is that we're going to start looking straight ahead again.
Yeah,
nice. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. There'll be less accidents of people that are crossing streets with their head down on their phone. No, I actually agree to you. It's going to get, like you saw the movie Her, right? It's very auditory based and then visual. If somebody can make the glasses, I mean, what we're seeing, Google and Oakley and, some of those things, they're getting there, but it's really video. It's not, high resolution. And Adam, I know you're taking it one step further. We talked about embedded AI. Tell us what that thought is.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, this governance theme we talked about earlier is going to be table stakes for every organization of every size. I think that maturity is going to be there. Yeah, in 10 years, there's going to be an AI ecosystem that's connected / within your body that engages with the external world, just like Mo said. I think it's going to be a core part of our preventative health measures across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all mundane tasks are going to be automated. Robots are going to come, and the world is made for humans. So humanoid robots in 5 to 10 years are going to become really prominent. And then hopefully we can go back to being humans and, focus on, artistic endeavors, poetry, the humanities. And then when it comes to business, the highly strategic, intuitive thinking of what needs to happen next in partnership with AI agents and bots and the next manifestation of AI. I can't wait to see it. So Adam, thank you for joining us. Mo, thank you for joining us. I would love to do this again. This was a really, resounding and, fabulous conversation. So thanks everyone out there for tuning in. More to come with our Tech Plus series. Thanks again.